Yeah, and welcome to Daily Focus with me, Anne Edwards. This is the second segment of Bernama News. Now, do you know that Malaysian journalists, editors and also writers record a low application of social networks such as Facebook, Twitter for professional purposes? I'm sure you've heard all that. The findings are actually from some data released today from 2010 Media Relations Practices Survey in Malaysia, a research collaboration between Intelectasia, Consultancy and also Mara University of Technology, and that is UITM. And with me in the studio to discuss all this is the Chief Executive Officer of Intelectasia, Ms. Manminder Kaur Dillon, also known as MK. Welcome, MK, to our set.
Thank you so much.
And now tell us, what is the objective, the whole objective of having this survey in the first place?
Well, and I think most members of the journalists, the media, and also the PR professional, most of the time they work very closely together. They have what we say a symbiotic relationship. They are supposed to have a symbiotic relationship as they both depend on each other. The PR professionals depend on the journalists to disseminate information. And journalists, on the other hand, they depend on PR professionals to send them that information. But however, throughout this course of me being a PR professional, and I was a journalist myself, so when I became a PR professional, I realized that there is a certain gap between these two groups. Even though they're supposed to work closely together, but there are that
So is this gap a major problem?
I wouldn't say it's a major problem, but it's something that we can look into and rectify it, make it better. As I said, these two groups, they are supposed to work closely together.
So if it's not rectified, what will be the effect of that?
Well, it will definitely affect on the working relationship. So when we work closely together and we have friction, so that will strain what our working relationship is all about. And secondly, we look at the value of the news stories that come out. Sometimes good news stories are delivered by PR professionals themselves. Journalists pick it up from them. So when you have this friction, the PR professionals are having difficulty picking up the phone and calling the journalist. Oh, I'm afraid they're going to slam down the phone on me. Oh, I have an issue. I can't actually deal with them. How do I send my press release? So that's going to create a huge problem to creating good newsworthy stories. So that's the objective.
Okay, before we move on to the next question, I can see that you've got very lovely hair, but it's actually affecting the microphone. It's right on your right. If you could, just push it a bit to your side, and we'll move on, of course, to social media, which is another aspect of your research. Why did you focus on social media, and why do you find that it's important, to have your research focus on this and to ascertain how many journalists actually use social media for their work?
Okay, let's look at why this research was done. There are three elements in this research. Firstly, we wanted to know what is the preferred mode of communication between the journalists and the PR. What do journalists want the PR to send them? How do they want them to send it to them? And what is the best way of communicating? That's the first objective. The second objective is the perception of journalists on PR professionals. So today we are actually having a journalist and a PR professional.
I don't have problems with PRs.
Yes, I know. But what we want to do is we want to identify what is the perception, and if it's a good perception, well done. If it's a negative,
there are journalists out there who probably do not have quite the right perception about PRs, having bad experiences, especially in terms of dissemination of information, which is not quite correct, and it's not in the context that the journalist requires.
Exactly. And this is something that we collated from this research. 72% of journalists say, 72% is really high, we interviewed 442. 72% said PR often overlook the element of newsworthiness. So that's really, really poor on our side. Why are we not looking at the element of newsworthiness? When we pitch for stories, that means are we hard selling? or are we just giving the story for the sake of giving a story?
And also another complaint is that journalists would say or have said often enough that PRs dictate the journalists, on the way they're supposed to cover a certain story and how they're supposed to deliver this in their news. So I don't think that's right.
I would agree with you, but unfortunately, as I said, this survey, this is why we did it. The best part is what you have said. PR dictate, yes, PR do have a spin factor. They do spin it for their benefit, and most journalists agree on that. However, unfortunately, that comes, it's not spinning, but our job at the end of the day, this is like a debate now between both of us, isn't it? Our job at the end of the day is to serve our client the best, to highlight the best stories.
But you should also see the interest and, the role of the journalist to, to present something that is newsworthy and not just to highlight the client.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially if the client is not paying for the slot.
Yes, I would highly agree with you. That's why we need them to understand how to come up with stories that are newsworthy. Don't just sell for the sake of selling, don't just spin for the sake of spinning, but create something that's newsworthy. So what happens is...
So is that the role of the PR or the journalist?
It's definitely the role of the journalist, the role of the PR. You have to find a news angle, you have to find a story. For example, if you have a CEO and you want the CEO to be interviewed, find something that is interesting. Don't just pick up the phone and call the journalist and say, hey, would you like to interview my CEO? He's this, he's that. But find something that will create that newsworthiness, that will attract.
And that curiosity.
Exactly.
That's very important.
Something that is... So how do you do that? You read papers, you identify what is the current trend. If it's something related to healthcare, and there was a major announcement made, so you have to highlight that CEO to quickly position himself. So that's how we do. So through this survey, journalists PR professionals must understand that this is the problem. 72% of journalists like yourself often say that PR professionals overlook the element of newsworthiness.
That's not quite right. I mean, I don't say that PR people do not give us sufficient news and the correct spin. Actually, you have improved over the years.
Okay.
So that it's really a compliment. But I find that very interesting that, who is at fault here when something doesn't get across the air in a very professional way? Is it the PR or the journalist? That's always that conflict, So has this survey and research actually addressed that? And have you found the conclusion, or how are you going to address this issue?
I think at the end of the day, as you have just mentioned, PR have improved tremendously. They have shown a good improvement throughout these years. And from this survey, we just hope that the improvement continues. We continue to serve better. And coming back to the question, who is at fault when a news is not delivered in the right way? Well, I think we both work together. The PR sends the press release or sends the news, and the journalist responds to the news and disseminates the information. So it's a two-way process. Nobody's at fault, and nobody's right, nobody's wrong.
Yeah, but your survey says 72% of people find that PR people they do not give contents that has a newsworthiness.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So 72% of journalists. So we, of course, we have another 28% more that agree.
So what sides the PR?
Sorry?
So what is citing the PR here?
What is citing the PR? Well, there is good news for the PR. There are some percentages of journalists that actually say that PR do not intrude into their private space or do not harass them unnecessarily. So there is some positive side. But let's look, what I would prefer is to look at it at a critical point of view.
Okay.
As we want to learn, we want to move. Yes, we do a good job most of the time. But we also need to learn from what are the negative side. Like 50% said we have poor media relations. Why half of the journalists that we have surveyed
when we're supposed to be public relations people?
Yes.
Yeah.
So why do we have that problem? So this, I hope, will be a first step. And instead of being an academic paper, let's focus on a field paper. What's happening down there? Let's learn from it, and let's become better and create better newsworthy stories. I think that's the key.
MK, Manminda, we need to take a short break, and of course we'll have more interesting revelation from MK right here in our studio on Daily Focus, and we're talking about the Malaysian media and of course social media and how journalists use social media in their work and the lack of acceptance. Well, and thanks for staying with us. We're talking about the Malaysian media and of course social media and the fact that not many journalists, only about 30% I was told, of journalists use social media, and that is of course Facebook, Twitter, YouTube perhaps in their research and also presentation of their news. In studio with me is Manminda Dillon, who is Chief Executive Officer of Intelectasia, which is a research company. Is that right, MK?
No, actually, and Intelectasia is a PR company. We started off as a training company in PR, as an ex-journalist, as I mentioned earlier. We do a lot of training, and I think through this survey, we would like to train more PR professionals to understand the needs of journalists.
You're also very heavy into research, yeah?
I love research. With my master's in corporate communication and all that, I've been trained to do research, and I feel that I want to share. The whole idea is about sharing, and moving forward, this research is about giving it to the students of PR.
So where does UTM come to all this?
Well, initially the survey was started on my own and only within the company. And what I realized was throughout that process, when a public relations company goes out and says, you know what, I want to do a survey, I want to find out what are the needs of journalists. So you go like, is it for monetary reasons? What are y'all going to achieve? You're an organization, a business company, so why do you want to do this? So there was a lot of setbacks. And definitely UITM coming in, Associate Professor Dr. Kiranjit was extremely helpful. And by her coming in, it just gave more credibility, strength, and her analysis, of course, was much appreciated. So at the end of the day, you need someone from a very strong research background to support the survey.
So, and based on that research, you found that about 30% of journalists only use social media. Let's determine what social media first. Is it Facebook, Twitter, and also YouTube, like what I was saying just now? Is
yes,
that right?
That's right. Okay. So Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Let me just correct you there. And it's actually 37.8%. We did not go on the whole of 30% only use social media, but we broke it down. So Facebook, only 37.8% of journalists use it several times a week. Okay. And that's not a very high number, not very significant. However, when you look at frequency level, Facebook is on a higher frequency.
Maybe because most media outlets, they do not encourage their employees to log on to Facebook during working hours.
That could be a factor. Yes. But I think it's also about personal space. I think at the end of the day, reaching out to...
Facebook is important.
Facebook is important, of course.
Why is it important?
Well, I think it is important to keep in touch with events that are special. Well, what happened was when I was a journalist, one of my friend, my colleague, she went online, got an invitation to join in this KL Mob Fest or something like that, where they go and they just freeze in malls. So she covered the story. And that's when it's important, because you get this invitation to something something interesting, something that's different. Another journalist friend of mine got an invitation to clean the Sungai Kancing.
So those are invitations and you know what's happening currently. But what about comments, speculations, and perhaps little bits here and there in Twitter, like that will spur your mind to think about, perhaps this politician is actually doing this because of this, things like that. I mean, how credible is social media then?
Let's not look at the credibility first. Let's look at the numbers that are responding to the survey. Sadly, Twitter, only 52% have not used Twitter. 52% of journalists surveyed in the survey, 442 of them have never used Twitter.
Is that bad? I mean, does that actually affect the progress of journalists in this country, especially with the moving, I would say, economy, and we're moving towards globalization? Is that bad, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think Twitter is a good method of keeping in touch, abreast with what's happening. Overseas, of course, when you compare this analysis with the Western counterparts, they use Twitter, journalists there, significantly. However, it again depends on what are your needs and requirements? If you are covering a political story, yes, go ahead, because most ministers are on Twitter nowadays. But then again, when you see that the number of people in Malaysia that are actually on Twitter, does that help at the end of the day? So we look at PR side now. When you see that Twitter is very low, the usage. So when I would like to launch an online media campaign, this is going to help me, because if I know Twitter is